day, everyone. I am Miss Iris G. Maglasang, and today I'll be presenting my topic entitled Cultural Influence on Decision Outcomes under the subject Management and Decision Making in the Doctor of Education program. In this presentation, we will examine how culture shapes decision outcomes, particularly in school leadership and management, and why culturally responsive decision making is vital in creating ethical and effective educational environments.
Imagine a school principal with a brilliant data-backed plan to boost student performance. On paper, it's a sure thing, but when they roll it out, they're met with resistance. Not because the plan is flawed, but because it clashes with the community's deep-seated cultural beliefs and family traditions. This isn't a rare scenario. It illustrates a critical reality in leadership. Decisions are never made in isolation. They land in complex ecosystem of cultural values and expectations. As researcher Walker and Demok noted, the very practice of leadership is fundamentally shaped by its cultural context. So what's a leader to do? The objective isn't just to be effective, but to be ethical and responsive. It means genuinely understanding the community you serve, listening to your values, and building policies that respect that diversity. It's about building bridges, not just enforcing rules. Because true leadership isn't just about the right data, it's about understanding the people.
This report examines how culture influences decision outcomes and explores its impact on communities, with particular emphasis on decision making and management practices in the school setting. Before discussing the influence of culture, it is important to understand two key concepts: the culture and decision making.
First, culture refers to the shared beliefs, values, norms, traditions, and practices that shape how people think, behave, and interact with others. According to Hofstede 1980, culture serves as a framework that guides individuals in interpreting situations and making choices. Second, decision-making is the process of selecting the most appropriate course of action from available alternatives in order to achieve desired goals. In educational management, decision-making involves balancing organizational objectives, ethical principles, and the interests of stakeholders. The relationship between culture and decision-making is significant. Research by Weber and Hesse 2000 and later by Gelfand and Chu 2020 suggests that people from different cultural backgrounds often make different decisions because they prioritize different values and expectations.
In other words, culture influences how individuals perceive problems, assess risks, define fairness, and evaluate possible solutions. Let us now explore how culture affects decision outcomes in educational setting.
Cultural values shape priorities. One of the most recognized cultural dimensions is the distinction between individualism and collectivism. Individualistic culture emphasizes personal achievement, independence, and self-expression. On the other hand, collectivist cultures emphasize group harmony, cooperation, family obligation, and community welfare. In school, this may affect how teachers, learners, and parents respond to policies and programs. For example, some stakeholders may focus on individual student achievement, while others may prioritize the welfare of the entire school community. Cultural influence and ethical judgments. Different cultural groups may have different understanding of fairness, respect, authority, and responsibility. What one group considers acceptable may be viewed differently by another group. Gelfand and Chu 2020 explain that cultural values influence how individuals define ethical behaviors and evaluate decision outcomes. For school leaders, this means that ethical decision-making requires sensitivity to cultural differences while ensuring that decisions remain fair and consistent with professional standards. Influence on leadership and decision-making styles. Culture also affects leadership practices. Walker and Dimmock 1999 found that leadership approaches vary across cultural settings. Some cultures prefer collaborative leadership where decisions are made through consultation and participation. Others value hierarchical structures where leaders are expected to make decisions independently. As educational leaders, understanding these preferences help us communicate effectively and build stronger relationships with stakeholders. Influence on stakeholder participation. Another area influenced by culture is stakeholder participation. The willingness of teachers, parents, and community members to engage in school decision making often depends on cultural expectation regarding authority and leadership. According to Orr and Berkovic 2021, participation in decision making differs between collectivist and individualist cultures. In some communities, stakeholders actively voice their opinions, while in others, they may differ to authorities' figure. Application in the Department of Education context. This includes cultural diversity in Philippine schools, DepEd commitment to inclusive and culture-responsive education. An example is an aspiring school principal. Cultural diversity in Philippine schools. In the Philippine educational system, cultural influence is particularly important. The Philippines is a culturally diverse country with learners coming from different linguistic, religious, ethnic, and socioeconomic backgrounds. School serves communities with unique traditions, beliefs, and values. School leaders must consider these differences when developing programs and making decisions. DepEd's commitment to inclusive and culture-responsive education. The Department of Education promotes inclusive and culture-responsive education through policies that recognize and respect learners' diverse backgrounds and experiences. Recognizing this diversity, the Department of Education promotes inclusive and culture-responsive education through various policies and programs. The Department of Education Policy Guidelines on Inclusive Education and the Indigenous Peoples Education Program emphasize respect for diversity and culturally responsive practices in schools. What to do as an aspiring school principal. Suppose a school plans to implement weekend intervention program for struggling learners. Some parents may support the program because it provides additional learning opportunities. However, others may oppose because weekends are dedicated to religious activities, family responsibilities, or community traditions. In this situation, an effective principal would not immediately impose a decision. Instead, the principal would gather stakeholders' feedback, analyze learner performance data, consider cultural concerns, balance educational goals with community values, and develop a solution that is both ethical and practical. Now let's move on to ethical considerations in decision making. This includes ethical principles in educational leadership, balancing culture and ethics, and importance of cultural competence. Ethical principles in educational leadership. Educational leaders have a responsibility to uphold ethical principles in every decisions they make. These principles include fairness, respect, accountability, transparency, and inclusivity. When making decisions, school leaders must ensure that all stakeholders are treated with dignity and that decisions are made openly and responsibly. Balancing culture and ethics. While culture should be respected, educational leaders must ensure that decisions align with professional ethics, learner welfare, equity, and DepEd policies. There may be situations where cultural practices conflict with learner welfare, equity, or established educational policies. In such cases, leaders must carefully balance cultural sensitivity with professional responsibility. Importance of cultural competence. Culturally competent leaders listen actively to stakeholders, respect diverse perspectives, recognize potential biases, and foster trust and collaboration. By developing cultural competence, school leaders can build trust, strengthen leadership and relationship, and improve decision outcomes.
Culture significantly influences decision outcomes in educational settings. It affects how stakeholders perceive issues, evaluate alternatives, make ethical judgment, and respond to leadership decisions. For educational leaders, understanding cultural influences is not optional, it is essential. It enables us to make decisions that are ethical, inclusive, and effective. As future school principals, one must strive to respect diversity, uphold ethical principles, and promote the success and well-being of every learners. Allow me to end this report with this statement. Effective educational leadership is not only about making the right decisions, but also about understanding the cultural context in which those decisions are made. When ethics, values, and cultural awareness work together, schools become more inclusive, equitable, and responsive to the communities they serve. Thank you and have a good day, everyone.